I am pleased very much to introduce Bill Zook, who I'm thinking most of you know, but maybe not all of you. Bill's been a member here since 1981 and works as a charitable giving consultant. He has two sons, Ben and Dan, who are both YF graduates, young adults, and his wife is a member up at St. Mark's. Bill's a lawyer, but did lots of religious studies in college. And I didn't know this about you, Bill. Your first job after college was directing an educational ministry at Capitol Hill Presbyterian Church in Washington, D.C., wow, where he once received a piece of mail from the National Council of Churches addressed to Reverend John William Zook, Jr. So today he is fulfilling his destiny. And we're really, really glad. Let me just say one more thing before I hand it over to Bill. This planning team, I was so blessed to work with this group of 6 people, and I think they all deserve a round of applause. So Colleen Lyons is here, Courtney Hashimoto is here, Mary Lee Matthews is here, Bill's here. Unfortunately, Jane Dunkel and Mary Lee Peters are not here, but please, if you see them around Plymouth, thank them for their hard work. It was really a joy and a pleasure, and it's been a really wonderful group to work with. So, amen. Without further ado, here's Bill.
Thank you. I guess I better mic up in both respects. Yeah. Can you do it so that it is the way it should be? Well, thank you all for coming out. You know, 5 weeks ago it was thank you all for coming out in the dark, but it's still light. And what a pleasant experience it was for me, at least, to have it most of the day be sunny. So that's great. Our topic tonight is before us, and hope it will be useful and helpful to you as we finish out Lent. How many of you have been here for all 6 sessions? Great, good. Well, your perspectives will be helpful, but certainly the rest of you who are here tonight will help make us a good group too. And I should also ask, I know at least 3 of you who have formal theological training, but can I see the hands of those 3 and maybe a few others? Okay. All right, great. Well, I will welcome any commentary that you may have. This is going to be informal, as I think you might have gathered, and I don't mind some back and forth during my part of the evening, but there will be, as usual, opportunities for people to break up into very small groups, usually 3 or 4, and also an opportunity for us at the end to share thoughts and be guided by the sheets that I'm assuming that all of you have. So let me press on at least to the next slide. Those of us who were involved in the planning for this had a number of different approaches we considered to doing something with the 6 Wednesdays in Lent that we would have. And we settled at length, after looking at a number of possibilities, on working from the Common Lectionary. And we were all given by our resourceful facilitator, Jennifer, lists of the passages for the various Sundays, and asked to read them. Each of us took a Sunday, and trying to look at what might have spoken to us among the various verses. And as it turned out, in 5 out of 6 cases, the person responsible for one of the Wednesday programs settled on the gospel reading. Now, Courtney had originally chosen something other than the gospel, but he felt really called to that passage and really made it his own in his presentation with us some weeks ago. And of course, last week we had a concentration on the epistle reading. For this coming Sunday, which is both traditionally Palm Sunday, but in more recent years has become as well Passion Sunday, with the thought that fewer and fewer people attend church during Holy Week, really between Palm Sunday and Easter. And so the passion of Jesus' death and either the leading up to that on Maundy Thursday or Good Friday is not observed in terms of worship attendance. And so this is a way to sort of at least get people oriented to the fact that their was trouble ahead in the week to come. And so it's a crazy service, as I'm sure you've experienced. You come in and there's jubilation on the front end, and by the end it is a matter of people having fallen away or denied Jesus in his darkest time. And so it's the Common Lectionary accordingly has a number of different passages that are available. There are Palm Sunday-oriented ones, and there are Passion Sunday-oriented ones. I settled on the Palm Sunday reading because of one particular verse. But let me read for you. Parts of it were read in a somewhat different translation during the service. And for this, I need to switch out a pair of glasses here. Bob Turner, in particular, is familiar with my constant struggle with glasses. I have bifocals, which are good within a certain range, and other glasses not. So the passage that I chose was Luke chapter 19, verses 28 to 40. And listen now for the word of God as it comes to us in this passage. This is Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem. After he had said this, he went on ahead, going up to Jerusalem. When he had come near Bethpage and Bethany, at the place called the Mount of Olives, he sent 2 disciples, saying, "Go into the village ahead of you, and as you enter it, you will find tied there a colt that has never been ridden. Untie it and bring it here. If anyone asks you, 'Why are you untying it?' just say this, 'The Lord needs it.'" So those who were sent departed and found it as he had told them. As they were untying the colt, the owners asked him, "Why are you untying the colt?" They said, "The Lord needs it." Then they brought it to Jesus, and after throwing their cloaks on the colt, they set Jesus on it. As he rode along, people kept spreading their cloaks on the road. As he was now approaching the path down from the Mount of Olives, the whole multitude of the disciples began to praise God joyfully with a loud voice for all the deeds of power that they had seen, saying, "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest heaven." Some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, order your disciples to stop." He answered them, "I tell you, if these were silent, the stones would shout out." So the particular verse that spoke to me was the very last one. I just thought it's neat to, I can have a visual image of the setting with stones around and the various people having various points of view about the whole thing. And I was really intrigued by this, and I hope it will capture, at least to some extent, your imaginations as well. Now, I wanted to have a little fun with this and give you a sense of various translations of this one little verse. And I went online and just typed in this number, or this Luke 19:40 into Google, and I took pretty much the first thing that came up because it had a lot of different materials to it. It appeared to be a website that was sponsored by a fairly conservative approach to Christianity in terms of the translations of the Bible that they had. For example, they didn't have anything like the Revised Standard Version or the New Revised Standard Version. So they had the King James, as you might imagine, and some other translations, some of which were more colorful than others. It's called mbible.com, whatever that might be. But if you want to go home and look it up, you can. But I found it fascinating how for each little portion of the verse, there were different translations. And some of these may or may not help you have a greater access to the passage, but it's interesting how much variety is. So if you've looked at these different renderings of the initial one, and that's, I'm sorry, these slides, sometimes you get the whole thing when you click, and sometimes they come in one by one, so I will try to keep on top of that. But as it proceeds, you always get at least a couple of choices of what supposedly was said by Jesus. And I like, for example, I like the notion of hold their peace. To me, that seems a little more poetic. I can't remember which version, which translation that came from, but I thought that was kind of neat. And then here we'll finish up with the end things. And you know what's interesting, oopsie, is that the translation we use from the New Revised Standard, talking about shouting out, that's a singular translation. Nothing else mentions that. They do cry out instead. Shout out, cry out. I don't know if that makes a difference. But what's interesting too is that I also looked at a book called the Five Gospels, which was put out by the Jesus Seminar. And how many of you have heard of the Jesus Seminar? Am I familiar with it? Okay, pretty much all of you. A group of scholars still ongoing, and I should say that the Adult Education Board is working very hard to have a Jesus Seminar program brought to Seattle here at Plymouth within the next year or so. I've found the work of this bunch of scholars to be just absolutely fascinating. And included is a lot of commentary, a lot of looking into who Jesus was as a historical figure and how what he said or what was said about him relates to one another from a scholarly point of view. And they translate this passage as, I tell you, if these folks, now folks was not a word we'd seen in any of the other translations, if these folks were to keep quiet, these stones would break into cheers. So breaking into cheers is another expression that you don't see in any of these other translations. So I don't know how many of you ever have done this with a particular sentence or a paragraph or whatever in a Bible reading, but I just found it to be very interesting, and I appreciated having the opportunity to do that as I prepared for this and share with you the results. Now, let's kind of look back at what was going on here. What was the nature of the testimony, which I'm going to sort of define for our purposes as an oral expression of faith, or pardon me, as a verbal expression of faith, whether oral, spoken, or written. And this is what it was. They praised God, and they did it joyfully and loudly. Now, this next one, the one after this, I'm sorry, for all the deeds of power they had seen. This next one, if I can get it to work, this is what's significant, is that there is in this praise both attention devoted to God, the Creator, and in this one portion of what the disciples are reported to have said, a reference to Jesus. But even that reference mentions both Jesus, the King, and the Lord in whose name Jesus came. And then peace in heaven and glory in the highest heaven. And this is significant, I found, because a lot of the different commentaries, in turn, on the different translations, I think, and this is particularly a characteristic of more conservative understandings of the Bible, there's this sort of foregone conclusion about Jesus' majesty. And that's where the Jesus Seminar is almost the opposite of it. They try to look and say, well, did Jesus really even have that much of a sense of his being the Messiah? Or did he bring the Word of God? Was the gospel he preached still powerful, still true, still reliable, still a good guide for our faith, but without, as strong a sense as some others have interpreted the Bible as of him being self-aware in terms of his identity as the Savior. And I think that one of the things the Jesus Seminar does too, and beyond a point, not everybody buys this Jesus Seminar stuff. I understand that, but one of the things they do is that in various passages that were supposedly spoken by Jesus, they sort of rate them, like how likely was that Jesus himself actually said this, versus these being words that were put into his mouth by a gospel writer who had the benefit of some decades of development of the early Christian faith as it grew after Jesus' death and resurrection. And they gave pretty much every passage that we're going through tonight a kind of a low rating. So they think these were things that were put into Jesus' mouth, if you will, to be theological affirmations of what the gospel writer, whoever it might be, figured was the case. But again, I just wanted to break down what it is this testimony was, because it incurred the unhappiness of the seemingly perpetually unhappy Pharisees. But now, I also looked then at the particular passage that was of interest to me, and this is where we look at this sort of conditional statement that he puts out there. And again, I saw a lot of the commentaries that took this this approach, that Jesus knew about his status, if you will, as the Messiah, and he would just, it could not have been otherwise, but in a way that's almost coming to the conclusion before you learn about how the story develops. And then there was another commentary. I didn't see this one as much, but it was an attempt or a theory that the stones would be the Gentiles. And it's sort of like, well, even the Gentiles would probably appreciate what's going on here more than these Pharisees, even though the Pharisees were themselves Jews. This is another line of thought that I saw a few times, that God, as it said, could and would actually make the stones proclaim the good news message that was there. And it was interesting because some of the other commentators said, no, that's not what this passage means. It's definitely not to be read literally or in the sense that it has instead some figurative meaning. And then finally, interestingly, this last one came when I Googled United Church of Christ's website and looked for this passage. It appeared one time in a document that was posted on the website that had to do actually with religious education. It's a rather long document, and I found it on page 57 or something out of 60. It took me a while, but there it was finally. But this is kind of the UCC reflection on this, that kind of constantly, whether anybody else is testifying or not, nature is testifying. God's creation is testifying to God's majesty. So I thought I would share with you some of what I found and those kinds of things too. Now, we now get, I think, to the more important question. And even though this seemed like a good question, a good title for the session tonight, as I thought about it more, I think, had I gone back, I might have rephrased it a bit. Because I think that even if we do testify, whatever we say about Jesus, about God, about our faith, there are other people talking about it too. So whether we have our voices be part of it or not, this kind of, Jesus is not a dull subject. There are people who are going to speak up and have all through the relevant period of history. But I do think that if we don't testify, our voices will not be heard. And I think that's really where the imperative lies for us, is that whatever our testimony is, whatever our understanding is, I think we have an obligation to share it in whatever ways we think are meaningful or effective. And, it's interesting that this was, in a way, a question even at Jesus' time, a question that he posed. Now again, these are passages from other Gospels that are similar. There's not such a passage in Luke, but we do find it in Matthew and Mark, where Jesus first says, well, who do people say that I am? What is said about me out there? And so that's what I'm trying to say, is that there are a lot of people saying things about Jesus in our day and back through the relevant history, a couple of thousand years. And then he gets an answer, and he says, but who do you say that I am? And of course, I think this is the most important question for us. And so even though this is not part of the lectionary reading for this week, I felt it was important to draw this in here because it, to me, captures that. Now, again, you got an interesting translation from the 5 Gospels. And by the way, the 5th Gospel is the Gospel of Thomas, which the scholars found to be, in many respects, a reliable source about who Jesus is, even if it's not canonically accepted. And so in Mark, the Jesus scholars say, what are people saying about me? What about you? Who do you say that I am? And in Matthew, what are people saying about the son of Adam? What about you? What do you say? And, again, in our own day, people are saying a lot of things about Jesus. Have you ever seen on buses or other things around town that placard that says, Jesus is blank? Well, this is where it leads. And this is a website put up by a local church, the City Church here in Seattle. And it's fascinating. Has anybody been to this site? Checked it out? You should. You get there, and you find a sort of checkerboard of all the different responses that people have given in filling in this blank. And I'm trusting that these are real responses because they are, they take quite a variety, and some of them are very flip or anti-Christian or all, and so I don't think they were dreamed up necessarily by the people who run this website. I believe them to be authentic expressions of people who visited the site and decided to fill in the blank. And I guess any of us could visit the site, fill in the blank, and then see if our reply comes up. But here are some of the ones, and they rotate constantly. They're in a kind of a checkerboard. They are arrayed 4 across by 3 down, so a total of 12. But as you watch the site on the screen, every few seconds, one of the boxes changes. And so you're getting a constantly different thing. So I had to hit the printer real fast, and it captured whatever was there. So Jesus is 97.5% lean ground beef. Jesus is my provider. Jesus is in love with you. Jesus is the creator of Pastor Judah Smith, a reference lost on me. Jesus is my healer, my everything. Jesus is a Muslim. Jesus is going to save my mom. Jesus is the fundamental doctrine of true theology. Jesus is the light in my darkness. Jesus is freedom. Jesus is just this guy, So there they are. And but I think that's very solid proof that in our day, people are going to testify about who Jesus is, whether we testify or not. So what then is the significance of our testimony? And by the way, when you go to this site, you get, the people who put on the site sort of do fill in the blank for you. So you're like, well, here's who Jesus really is. Now, as I read through this statement, I don't have a lot of quibble with this. I think this is not a half-bad expression of my own thing. But the thing about his mission was a success. That brings to mind for me a certain airplane landing on a certain aircraft carrier about 10 years ago, and it gives me a little pause. But I dare say if one went to this church, they'd probably have a somewhat different experience than they did in ours. But to me, this is fairly good testimony about who Jesus is, basically. Oopsie. So I want to finally cast testimony as one form of witness. Again, testimony is an expression of our faith in a verbal way, either spoken or written. But witness is a very important, I think, sort of larger parent concept. And here is how, one way I would define it. It's a demonstration of your faith. It's an indication of what you stand for, what you believe, what you stand up for, what you're willing to sort of defend. I think, too, that witness is not strictly a Christian term, even though it is important, but I think it's an important part of every faith tradition. And certainly there is Jewish witness, and certainly there is Muslim witness. And to some extent, there are Jewish and Muslim witnesses about Jesus. But I think most of the witness of those faiths is to other aspects of their theology, their tradition, what have you. And, I think if it's not too vague to be helpful, but I think what we're after is effective witness. And as I say, effective here would be something that makes a positive difference in the life of others, even if it's difficult witness. Because as you know, in the Bible, the prophetic witness is often very critical. It's very harsh or judgmental on the people and on any of us who might read it. And so I think for something to be effective in a positive way, it doesn't necessarily have to be a positive message. It has to have, I think, that ultimate effect. And so that brings up the question, how do people, how do we witness to our faith? What kinds of other ways are people witnessing to their Christian faith or otherwise? Do people know us by the symbols that we display? The cross certainly being a traditional one, but there are others. They know us, as the song says, they know we're Christians by our love, by our love. They'll know we're Christians by our love. Do they know we're Christians because of our bumper stickers? That could be. There was a certain pastor of a certain downtown UCC church in Seattle who had a bumper sticker on his car some years ago. Others of you may have seen this, and I think it was actually a UCC bumper sticker. And it said something to the effect of, any fool can honk. If you love Jesus, work for justice. And so, if we love Jesus, is our work for justice demonstrating this? Are we witnessing to our faith in this way? And again, through our testimony, by what it is we declare. And if I thought of it, I'd have put another bullet point at the end about, just observances and various practices that we have. Going to church pretty much every Sunday is my witness to people who know me. My coworkers, my neighbors, my friends. It's a statement without being a verbal statement. But I think there are a lot of things, and this is among the questions I'm going to encourage you to discuss. I think there are a lot of ways that we in this church witness to our faith. And I think it's important that we be aware of just how much that is. And so even if testimony isn't our thing, I think witness is in many different ways for each of us. And I hope you'll be able to kind of come to an explicit understanding of these things. There was another minister at a certain downtown UCC congregation who had a heritage that was partly Christian and partly Jewish. Liz Ettinger, people remember Liz? And Liz gave a little talk to people those of us at the time who were young parents, and just said, it's very important that you have a household where your children see some indication as they go about the house, and that visitors to the house see some indication as they are welcomed in, that this is a Christian home or a Jewish home or whatever, that there be some symbols or there's something about the way that space is configured, decorated, whatever, that bespeaks faith. And I've found this to be, very helpful among a number of things that Liz said that have stuck with me. And leave you with that thought. Jennifer, I think we're more or less where you wanted me to be, and I, out of trying to get done, have not asked for or taken questions, but I don't know if people have any burning comments or if we want to move to the next section and know that there's an opportunity both to be heard there and afterwards. John?
I think it's interesting that throughout many of the passages that I can recall, Jesus has been soft-spoken or wanting his disciples not to speak out about something. Walking on water, the loaves and fishes. Don't tell people about this.
Right.
Don't go on and broadcast this. And I've always thought, well, why? Hey, that's not a very good way. You know, here's your main cheering party. Let's go out and spread the word. And yet in this text, the Pharisees are telling him to tell his people to stop, and he's saying, forget that. If they're silent, the stones will shout out. As if, of course it's going to be broadcast. And I don't know any other place that I've seen this kind of conversation.
Well, that is an interesting comment. Yes, I think I too am struck about how he not only tolerates it, I mean, he doesn't do as the Pharisees ask of him, but he has a certain understanding that it's going to occur. And I too have been musing on that, John, and I continue to muse on it. I'm not sure what it means. I mean, is this a critically different passage from others in the various Gospels, or is it somehow consistent with them, just, as you say, a sort of different set of circumstances where there's a different response on the part of Jesus?
I sort of wonder if he recognizes this is the last week, and that we got to start shouting a little bit, because we ain't going to be shouting much longer.
I think there's something to that. Do any of you folks with theological degrees want to weigh in on this? Seriously, I'm welcome for any enlightenment that you might want to share. If not, then in your small groups.
See, I always thought there was this is no theological background whatsoever, but I always thought he said, don't tell because you knew that they would tell. If you told them not to, they'd tell more.
Because you're a teacher.
Yeah. Well, but then in the end, there's sort of the Great Commission, and there's all kinds of telling going on. And so I think maybe it was the timing of the telling that had Jesus concerned. And you're right, John, maybe he began to determine that this is a transitional period, that my human existence is coming to an end, and there is another way in which henceforth the gospel is going to be proclaimed and preached and spread, and that is by people speaking up and shouting out and doing whatever it is they have to. Again, I would say in ways that are effective, because I think there's ineffective testimony too. I think if you're trying to communicate with somebody in a way where they have a barrier to what you're saying, and you know that barrier is there, you can sort of talk more loudly or more forcefully or whatever, or perhaps you can try to think of a different way to have your witness be effective with them than just otherwise trying to shout louder. But we'll see what comes out in the discussions you have among yourselves.